Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Enzo. I'm a bookseller here at McNally Jackson, and welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're very excited for tonight. We have the great Hisham Matar here in conversation with Sarah McNally, the owner of the store. And just some housekeeping reminders. We're gonna have a Q&A after the discussion. So if you have any questions you wanna ask, you can ask those after. We're also gonna have a book signing right here after the event. And our wine bar downstairs will be open till 9 p.m. And usually before events, we give an introduction about what booksellers at McNally liked about the book and our thoughts, what we loved about it. But what can I possibly say when Sarah McNally is right here? So I'm just gonna leave you with the bios. Hisham Matar was born in New York City to Libyan parents, spent his childhood in Tripoli and Cairo, and has lived most of his life in London. His memoir, The Return, was the recipient of many awards, including the 2017 Pulitzer Prize, the Penn Gene Stein Book Award, and the Rathbones Folio Prize. It was also shortlisted for the Bailey Gifford Prize, the Costa Biography Award, and a National Book Critics Circle Award. Matar is also the author of the novels In the Country of Men, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and Anatomy of a Disappearance. His most recent book is A Month in Siena. Matar is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and an Honorary Fellow of the Royal Academy of Arts. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages. And Sarah McNally is the owner of McNally Jackson Books. Thank you so much.
Actually, this is my most recent book.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming and welcome. This is kind of a really great honor for me. I think that this book, and I've liked Hisham Matar's work forever, but this book in particular, I'm not sure globally there's many writers working at this level or with this depth on the ideas of love, belonging, how to make find meaning in a life, how you construct a sense of self. This book, we almost did last year for the first time, we almost did a McNally Jackson Book of the Year, and this would have been the book that we chose without question. I think it is profound and beyond brilliant. And for this book, I would not be surprised. I'm going to say, I will not be surprised if starting from this book you win the Nobel Prize, and I want someone to take a photo of this. So me on stage with you, because I think that could happen. I love this book so much. I think we should start with your reading a little bit from it, and then I have some questions, and then we'll turn it over. I'm sure that everyone has lots of questions for this book.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Sarah. I'm really touched to be back in your beautiful bookshop. Can anybody hear me? Everybody hear me?
Mic close to mouth.
Closer to mouth, like this.
Yes.
It's very close. Very close.
It's almost a little icky, right?
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. So I'm just going to read a little from I'm actually going to stand just not as a gesture of dominance, but more as a gesture of respect. It is, of course, impossible to be certain of what is contained in anyone's chest, least of all one's own, or those we know well, perhaps especially those we know best. But as I stand here on the upper level of King's Cross Station, from where I can monitor my old friend Hisham Matar walking across the concourse, I feel I'm seeing right into him, perceiving him more accurately than ever before, as though all along, during the 2 decades that we have known one another, our friendship has been a study, and now, ironically, just after we have bid one another farewell, his portrait is finally coming into view. And perhaps this is the natural way of things, that when a friendship comes to an inexplicable end, or wanes, or simply dissolves into nothing, the change we experience at that moment seems inevitable, a destiny that was all along approaching, like someone walking towards us from a great distance, recognizable only when it is too late to turn away. No one has ever been as near a neighbor to my heart. I'm convinced, as I watch him go to his train for Paris, that city where the two of us first met so long ago and in the most unlikely way, that he is carrying, right where the rib cages meet, an invisible burden, one, I believe, I can discern from this distance. When he still lived here in London, hardly a week would pass without us taking a walk, either through the park or along the river. We sometimes got into a debate, usually concerning an obscure literary question, arguments that, perhaps like all arguments, concealed deeper disagreements. I would sometimes, to my regret, for the gesture has always displeased me, tap my forefinger on his chest and let my palm rest there for a fleeting moment, as though to keep whatever it was that I believed I had placed there stable, and I would, once again, take note of the distinct pattern of his ribs, the strange way his bones protruded, as if in constant expectation of an attack. He does not know that I am still here. He thinks I have left, rushed off to the dinner engagement I told him I was already late for. I'm not sure why I lied. Who are you eating with? He asked. No one you know, I replied. He looked at me then as if we had already parted ways and the present was the past. I standing at the shore and he on board the ship sailing into the future. That burden in the chest, I can see, has rolled his shoulders back a little, causing his hips to fall forward so as to compensate and stop him falling at the slightest push face first. And yet, he does look from this distance like a man possessed by action, moving forward, determined to enter his new life. These past years since 2011, since the Libyan revolution and all that followed it, the countless failures and missed opportunities, the kidnappings and assassinations, the civil war, entire neighborhoods flattened, the rule of militias, changed Hisham. Evidence of this was in his posture, but also in his features, the soft tremble in the hands, perceptible each time he brought a cigarette to his mouth, the doubt around the eyes, the cautious climate in them, a face like a landscape liable to bad weather. Soon after the start of the revolution, he returned home, and perhaps naturally, a distance opened between us. On the rare occasions he visited London, we were easy in one another's company, but less foolhardy somehow. I'm sure he too noticed the shift. Sometimes he stayed with me, sleeping on the sofa in my studio flat, sharing the same room where we could speak in the dark till one of us fell asleep. Most of the time, though, he got a room at a small hotel in Paddington. We would meet there in the neighborhood arranged around the train station, which fills the surrounding streets with a transitory air, made us both feel like visitors and accentuated the sense that our friendship had become a replica of what it had once been, when he lived here and we shared the city the way honest laborers share tools. But now, when he spoke, he often looked away, giving the impression that he was thinking aloud or involved in a conversation with himself. And when I was telling him a story, I would notice myself leaning forward slightly and catch an almost querulous tone in my voice, as though I were trying to convince him of an unlikely proposition. No one is more capable of falsities, nor as requiring of them, than those who wish never to part ways. I didn't intend to read that book.
Yeah.
I thought I'll only read a paragraph, but I got into it.
I like that line too about like sharing a city the way laborers share tools. Yeah, that's a good line. Okay, so I opened a page of like my notebook to start thinking of questions for you, and weirdly, when I opened it, I had written a line from this book down in the book. I just found it today. Can I read it? It's just
Yes,
one line.
please,
It's going to be much shorter, and I'm going to stay sitting down. Also, maybe as a power move.
Okay.
I've always tried to be honest with myself, if with no one else, believing that there's nothing more important, nothing more dangerous than a man who's dark in here. I'm not going to be able to see my own notes with my reading glasses. Okay. Believing that there's nothing more dangerous than a man who doesn't know what he's doing, who doesn't know his own mind. Cool. It was from them. Okay, so the first thing I want to ask you is, in the last, I think, 10 years, I've been noticing a revolution in the way that first-person narration is used in fiction. And in some places, I think I first, it really kind of hit, like slapped me like cold water with Rachel Cusk's memoir, Aftermath. And then with the books that she did since, you see it since, even in Han Kang's new book, you can see it. You can see it in Katie Kitamura. There's something that's changing in the first-person narrative voice. Tracing the history of your work, the way that you use first person has changed as well. It's become, this is my crackpot theory, almost like as memoir has become more literary and performative, that first person voice, there's been something sort of that has become more limpid in the first person voice used in fiction. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the evolution of the use of first person in your work, and also the influence of having written a memoir, how that changed it.
It's a very interesting way of coming at it, because I've always been fascinated by that moment, in The Brothers Karamazov, when suddenly the narrator is telling you the story about this family and these brothers, and then he breaks off a few lines in, and he says, "We heard this." Well, I'm not sure if it's the case, but that's what we heard. And suddenly you realize that what you're reading is hearsay, right? And I think that's quite a significant moment in the history of literature. But you could go earlier, much, much earlier. In fact, you could go to Titian, right? The painter. And you could see what Titian does is that he starts off where everything is precise. It's sort of, in a painting, a line stops exactly at a precise moment. A figure stops at a precise moment. The stars, the sky, the clouds, everything is so precise and crisp. And then he moves. We're lucky because Titian had a long professional life. He worked until his mid-80s, and evolved a lot. And you could see how suddenly he thinks, no, actually that's not the case. Things are fragmented. The interesting thing about existence is that it's constantly mobile and uncertain and moving. And I think that is actually the moment when modernism sort of starts. When suddenly everything starts to become hearsay, open to interpretation. So that's always fascinated me, this move. And then what happens when you give up on a kind of godlike view of things, a still, constant, fixed view of interpretation of existence, and you rely more on the partial, subjective view. The limitations themselves have always fascinated me. So once you speak in the first person, there's so many things you can't talk about, that is exactly the thing that has always fascinated me, the things that you can't talk about.
And so coming back, because when you wrote a memoir, and then you came back and you wrote this novel, when I look at your earlier work, the narrative voice is more literary. In the purity of this experience, it's sort of, there's something about reading this book and the tone of the narration. It shows just the essential, to me, it echoed with the loneliness of being alive. I felt it in every sentence of this book. And of course it's a book about loneliness and it's a book about exile, but it's also a question of tone I thought.
Yeah.
And that was a tone. So coming back to it after having written a memoir, how did that change how you wrote in first person?
I mean, the strange thing with this book is that it was a long time coming, you know? So I had the first sentence a few years before I wrote the memoir. I wrote the first sentence in 2011 or 12. And I just didn't know what happens, like who's speaking. It is, of course, impossible to be certain of what is contained in anyone's chest, least of all one's own or those we know well, or particularly those we know best. But as I stand here on the upper level of King's Cross stage, you've heard it. So I just,
you read it well.
Yeah, and it just stayed with me. And I used to do this. I don't do this anymore. I'm very glad I've cured myself of this ailment. But I used to test my babies. You know, I would sort of. I would write a page and I think, oh yeah, I really feel this deeply. This is interesting. And then I just subject it to forgetfulness. I think I'll just abandon it. See if it could fight for itself. It's terrible thing to do. It's really a terrible thing to do. And I did that with this one. I just thought, well, okay, let's see if you stick, you know. And it did. You know, I kept carrying this sentence. And I sometimes catch myself repeating it in my head and thinking, what would be the next one? And who's speaking? What is this about? And it constantly felt like I was turning up to the party too early or in the wrong clothes or something was wrong, you know, about the timing. And I trust that. So I wrote The Return. The Return was, now from this perspective, The Return, you're right, was an education. It was a way of thinking about the first person in a different way. And the funny thing about The Return is, as I was writing it, that's a book that really came out of my veins. It was very difficult to write. But as I was writing it, I felt that I was anticipating a kind of more playful, a more, a bigger space. I don't know, I had all along as I was writing it, I anticipated that. And I think it has to do with this question of registers and voice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how to stay honest, and if you're writing something from an internal voice, how to stay honest. Because you are fun. You're a fun person.
Thank
so
you.
I can see why. I can see why if you went down to sat down to write a memoir, you'd expect it to be. But then you've chosen rather a grim subject matter.
Yeah, the subject chose me, I would have to say. But you know, the funny thing is, I really think books are your fate. You know. I think the books we read are our fate also. Of course, you can have a very good story about how you and that book met. But you know that the books that have really met you at the right moment, and you know what that's like. You know that's also, it's sort of your fate. And as a writer, it's your fate in the sense of what it demands from you. I feel a book arrives with its temperament, you know. It arrives with its appetites, with its voice, with its requirements. I've always felt that word author is slightly ironic. Its connection to authority is slightly ironic because the real authority is the book. You're sort of attending to it. And The Return, I remember when I started it and started to learn those early stages when you're on the shore of a book and you're learning about its voice, its temperament, its rhythm, its requirements, the things that it wants to do. I remember thinking, I'm not sure I can do that, you know, that it had an appetite that felt greater than my own. And so I felt really privileged, I felt really lucky to have a book like that. It was when I was a kid. Sorry, I'm going from one subject to another. But when I was a kid, I was really a keen horseback rider. I loved horses, and I rode every morning before school from 5 o'clock. I mean, I hate getting up early, so that tells you how much I loved horses. I'd ride from 5 to 7 in the morning, every morning. And sometimes you get to the stables and it's your luck. It depends what horse is available. And sometimes I'd get a horse that was just much better, bigger, serious horse, needs a serious rider. And there I am, I'm sort of, 10 or 11 trying to ride this horse. And the return felt like that. It felt like this horse that had this appetite that was greater than my own. And anyway, I'm going in different directions.
No, that's awesome. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about. So I'm assuming that everyone in this room has a rough idea of your biography and your body of work. Safe to say? Safe to say. Okay. So because your life story is been so sort of spun around by fate, again, where you've lived, where you've ended up, what happened to your family, what happened to your country, that you've been, you've not been, you and your family were not simply masters of your own fate because of what happened in your country. I've been looking at this book in particular, my friends, and then thinking back to previous books you've written, and wondering how you've used your writing to think about paths not taken, how you wrote about your brother in your memoir, how you write about your friends in this book, and how you've written previously. Because when fate has been has had such a strong hand at the card game of your life, there must be questions that I have to address.
Yes, I mean, to make the distinction between the memoirs and the novels, I mean, these aren't my friends by any stretch of the imagination. They are. I have friends. Against all visible evidence, I do have friends. But your question is really pertinent because I'm not. I mean, again, against all visible evidence, I'm a very private person. So to be writing so openly about things that have happened is it doesn't come naturally. It's not my. And I have to also say I'm slightly suspicious of it because I don't think that my life or my family or all these things that I've written about are more interesting than. In fact, I would bet that any one of you, I would be much more fascinated by your lives than my own. So it's not. I'm not writing about them because I think they're important, but they're sort of my education. They're sort of what has taught me the little that I know. Right. So it's so I have. If I have an ambition, the ambition is to sort of use the particular to go into a subterranean network of human emotions and psychologies and that we all share. I write, I don't know why I write, but I think part of the reason is to do with the kind of, to reciprocate, to give back the pleasure that I've received. I've always loved, there was a moment, the pre-Renaissance moment, when people wrote books and put them on the shelf without putting their names on them. So the idea that you just contribute to the shelf that has given you so much. And and I've found myself, as I'm sure you all have, in books written by people who are completely different from me, but I found myself in those books, and so I'm inspired and motivated by the example of literature's ability to take the particular into something that connects to other places. But having done it and doing it, doing the writing so privately, had some surprises to me, So when I started writing The Return, I thought, oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. And
do what in particular?
Just write so openly, so personally about my life and my family. I can't do that. And but I just thought, do it. You don't have to publish it, just do it. So once it's done, the interesting thing about writing is once you finish a book, and the finishing is always a surprise to me, because you write the last sentence, it really is like that. You write the last sentence and you realize that's the last sentence. And what it does is it sends this note across the whole book, and you sense this resonance, and that's when you know it's finished. Once you do that, it oddly isn't yours. It doesn't feel yours in the way that it did when you were working on it. It's yours, but not in the same way. And so, so I thought, we will publish this book. And when it was published, I was very anxious about it coming across as giving license to people to ask me all sorts of questions, because I don't enjoy that. I don't want that. And the surprise is that once it got published, people actually became much more restrained. Before the return, people asked a lot of questions, personal questions. After the return, people with less. Sorry, I'm not trying to frighten anyone here to ask personal questions.
You totally frightened me. I'm now scanning. Jeez.
What's your personal question?
I mean, they're all personal questions. That quote that I read when I first sat down about your knowing yourself, I thought you made yourself sort of open terrain to be asked personal questions because you apparently know yourself so well. Okay, next question. Ready? Okay. This actually was interesting to me. So I read this book last year, obviously, when it came out. And then that year, I'm from a city in Canada called Winnipeg, which is really, no one's ever been there because no one ever goes there.
I've been there.
What?
Yeah.
Really? What did you do there?
Another story.
Okay. It's pretty rotten. I hadn't been home in 17 years. Last time I'd been home was for my sister's wedding, and I just went home for her divorce. And I was like, this place is even worse than I remembered, which is startling because it was pretty bad even when I lived there at the time. And having read your book and the idea, I wasn't exiled. I could go home to Winnipeg anytime I wanted. 17 years, the door was wide open. And I've chosen sort of not to make my home part of my narrative of self at all. And so much of your book is about exile and finding and creating an idea of self and family and history outside of place. And I just wondered, you've been writing now books about exile, and what is the role, do you think, of narrative in exile? Do you think that maybe living is just so much better than Winnipeg?
I think actually this subject has really exploded in our time and will only become more and more pertinent, because a lot of us, if we're not exiles, we're living away from something or living inside another language, or even if we're not, even if we live in the places where we're born and in the languages in which we were born, we're aware, I think, of a certain sense of fragmentation in our time, that the discourse is different, that we're not all reading the same things, the news we're getting isn't coming from the same place, that when we sit in our private hours and watch something, we know that we're not watching it with other people. We were talking earlier about books and how there was a time when a book would come out and everybody would be talking about it, and now it's very fragmented. So there's I think, a global sense of fragmentation, of knowing our place, knowing what tomorrow is like. I don't think we have ever lived in a time when the future has been more uncertain, more contested. We have very few visions of the future, So all of that, I think, is weighing psychically on us in a very specific way.
Also, our children aren't really as interested in the past anymore. So it doesn't feel like we can pass on the history of our family to our children, that could. So much of what you write about is about, homes that have been in families for generations, and kinds of food that have been eaten for generations in your family, and that there's not that same. Would it be weird if I read? Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, but do you want to read it yourself, or do you want me to read it?
No, you read
it. Okay. This is just. I thought this was a really beautiful. If you've got the book on you, it's on page 326. And it's the third sentence of the big paragraph at the bottom. It says that what I want to return to, I cannot return to because the place and I have changed, and what I have built here might be feeble and meek, but it took everything I had, and I fear if I leave, I will not have the will to return, and then I will be lost again, and I've been lost before, and will do everything not to be that again, and that I do not know if it is cowardly or courageous, and I do not care, and I have decided without deciding, because it is my only option, to keep to the days, to sleep when it is good for me to sleep, and wake in good time to attend to my work and the people who depend on me.
I'm very glad you read it. Not only because you read it well, but because you read it beautifully, but because that is actually the page in the book that I can't read in public. I find it so moving. I'm very moved by it. So there are places in your books that you have to avoid reading from in public, and that's definitely one of them. Yeah.
Strange coincidence, but I just thought it was such a. So, this paragraph in the context of exile means one thing, but it's actually applicable, I think, to many, many people's lives after a certain point.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think. One of the things that nobody tells you, there's many things that people never tell you, but one of the things that nobody never, it's how much courage you need to live just even the most settled life, even the most privileged, whatever definition you want to give. You need a lot of courage to live a life, I think, and so these questions of exile, of course, they're circumstantial. There are specific circumstances like what you said about your relationship to your hometown, and specific circumstances of my relationship to my home country. But I think I really think they have moved beyond these things now. I think a lot of us feel that.
I just looked at the time, and we should turn it over Q&A, but I also just noticed I have an impersonal question.
Go for it.
It's maybe a little pretentious. No, I'm not going to do it. Let's turn it over. If there's not questions from the audience, then we'll see what happens. It was just about post-colonialism, unless you...
No, now that you start.
Okay. It's about post-colonialism. I mean, this is, I thought, also kind of a great post-colonial novel, and I was thinking that when you wrote it, you were living in London, which is, a historical and current center of colonial power. And also, the center of colonial power that we're even seeing right now as we see what's happening in Gaza. It's like that's a direct result of British colonial power. How was that living in London at that? Oh, that is personal again.
That is actually a very that's such an interesting question. And living in Britain, so I arrived to Britain when I was 15, and I went to a boarding school. Boarding school in Britain is a very specific experience, and so there were very clear ideas about how to be, how to speak, how to think. I think one of the things that is, many people here who know me would know that I have a particular love for Marcel Proust, and I think Proust's interest in snobs is because a snob is basically somebody who thinks, if only I said the right thing at the right time in the right way, I'll be fine. So a snob is actually a host of great anxieties and doubt. And Proust really works with that in so many different ways. And so I went to one of those schools where people were just, snobs. But you encounter British imperial temperament in these very small things, and I've always been interested in the indirect statement. So living a life in Britain, one of the things you have to do if you are from North Africa is that you have to navigate all of this. You have to learn how to navigate it, not to be hampered by it, not to be, so that's definitely, it's a big subject. We could speak all night about that.
Okay, do people from the audience want to ask some questions? Do you want my microphone? Oh, great.
Okay, Ms. Matar, I understand you spent at this point in your life, you're spending time. Could you talk about the fact you're spending time in both London and in New York City? I think you're teaching at Barnard. And if you could talk about that, I mean, Sarah just mentioned the fact, London colonialism. Do living in either of those cities, does it change the way you write? Do you think about things differently when you're in the different cities? How do you divide your time between these two great cities and how they affect you or not?
I mean, I live half the time here and half the time there. I'm not at least consciously aware that I think differently in one or the other. It's hard for me to assess that. All I know is that New York is very unusual. I mean, there's no place really where you arrive and nobody asks you where you're from. I mean, I can't tell you how wonderful that is. I mean, I've been in Britain since 1986, can you imagine? I've lived the overwhelming majority of my life there. But because of the way I sound, everybody will ask me. Everybody says, well, so where are you from? And part of me enjoys that also, because I also enjoy I don't want to be obliged to belong. I want to be able to belong if I want to, but I don't want to be obliged. It's maybe a perversion on my part. But here in New York, all that disappears, because nobody ever asks me that. And also, I come here with a love story in my history, because my parents had just lovely times here. So I grew up with all of these beautiful stories of all the things that they did here. So even though they're not here with me, I feel their presence in some way. So.
Can I read a sentence from your book that's applicable to this? Okay, thanks. I just thought this was such a, that feeling when you meet a city and it's almost like meeting a person. It just has its own sort of aura that you can't, it seems greater than the sum of its parts, so you can explain. And you wrote on page 224, you said, and the people, the color, and the way of things, that particular signature that each city creates for itself and somehow maintains. I love that so much, the peculiar signature that each city creates for itself and somehow maintains.
It's also, you notice that when you arrive in a new place, there's a rhythm to it, there's a different sort of texture to it. And it changes how you behave. The other thing that's wonderful, maybe this is me being sort of, deaf to all the subtleties of New York. You'd be able to tell me much better. But one of the things that happens in Britain is that as soon as you're involved in a social interaction, people are assessing you on class straight away. Even if you're buying a newspaper, people are somehow subconsciously, they don't think about it. Whereas here, I don't feel that's maybe going on, but maybe that's just me not getting it. Maybe you guys think. Maybe it is going on all the time.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no?
I don't think so.
There's a hand over there, all the way at the end. Yes, after you. Sorry. Just because somebody's out of view, I want to...
I understand, no worries, thank you. And I also don't know, because I'm not from New York, I'm also from Europe. I grew up in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So I feel the same way. Yeah, so there's so many things that I would like to address. So you talk about, you spoke about, exile and writing in exile or about exile. And with your personal sorry, it's going to be a bit of a personal question. With your personal background and your family history and your relationships, I myself, I was born in Philadelphia, but I grew up in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and my family's from Liberia. And these are all countries where they have these great freedom ideals, but that were enforced with violence. So I always say I sort of sit on that intersection. And which makes you an exile. And I was wondering, in your work, when you write about that, do you feel like it's also a way of rewriting your way home because it's such a foreign thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good question. No, I don't. I don't feel when I'm writing. Maybe I'm doing it without being aware, but I don't feel when I'm writing to get anything for myself. I feel writing to me is a form of praise. If praise is to look at something really attentively and want nothing from it, and just really study it closely. So that kind of love, if you like, praise, love, all these words are imprecise to what I'm talking about, but it's something somewhere in that vicinity, you know. If you've ever sat and really looked at a tree, not to possess it, not to want its fruit, just to look at it, you know.
Surrendering to what it's telling you, basically.
Yes, you know, studying it in some sense. Studying it, yeah. So this is a way of being in the world that I feel I know a little bit about, and I'm curious about because it has touched me. So I want to know more. I write out of that sort of, out of that space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending the evening with us. In My Friends, you present political activism as both a moral imperative, but one that comes at a great cost. And obviously that was in the context of the 80s. I'm curious to hear, in light of what's going on today, particularly on the campus that you teach at, how do you think the profile of that imperative and cost of political activism has changed?
I think I think what's happening right now is incredibly unprecedented. You know, it's very painful to see this institution that is really quite fabulous, you know, and has many problems. But to me, at least, until very recently, it's felt like the last place where you could think freely, where you could, and to see it capitulate in this way to demands that are unprecedented, as you all know, and quite extreme. But I think more painfully for me to observe what it's doing to our students. It's very, very painful. So suddenly we are not only involved in a humanist education, but also in a political education. It's happening, again, to go back to what I was saying before about this fragmentation, it's happening also in a fragmented sense. People keep recalling, for obvious reasons, the late 1960s. But the late 1960s, that's a completely different atmosphere. There was much more unity, there was music, there was a sense of culture that was, even then, maybe might have felt as a marginal culture, but nonetheless coherent, you know. Whereas now there's a great deal of fragmentation. And so, again, psychically it's harder. But also very impressive. I have to say I'm very, very proud of our students. You know, I often feel that they're the only adults in the room. And they're really, I'm moved by their demands for justice, but I'm also moved by the support that they give one another, and how respectful they are of one another, and which makes it all the more painful when they are portrayed in ways that are, I think, really coercive and wrong. So they really deserve not only our support, but they really deserve our respect.
Do you have a question? Yes.
Thank you. Having turned your attention so deeply, or your praise or your love, to the topic of male friendship, I was wondering what you learned about friendship, or specifically male friendship, And as a reader, I felt like you were writing about friendships that are from a different generation. There's so much discussion today about male loneliness and young men having trouble connecting, and if you wanted to comment on that too, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if I have anything authoritative to say on the subject, but I sometimes wonder if the things that are said about male friendships are always true. You know, I know a lot of men who are in wonderful friendships and of different ages. You know, I have luckily many wonderful young people in my life who are very close to me, and they are involved in very passionate, long-lasting, deep, thoughtful, you know, decent, respectful friendships. So I'm not sure, you know, I don't know. But all I can say is that it's you know, I didn't think I was writing in praise of friendship, but it's clear to me that that's one of the surprises. It's not that I learned something, but I realized as I was writing the depth of my passions. You know, a writer told me once, David Malouf, wonderful writer, I'm sure you've read him, he's a lovely, lovely, wonderful writer from Australia of Lebanese origin. And David once was telling me about how as you write, you discover your passions, you know. I thought I knew what my passions were. It turns out I didn't. So the writing, and you know, and this is one example. I have a real passion for friendship. I'm amazed by it. When you think about it, there's no contract. You know, it's not like a marriage or a family or all these norms, you know, historical norms. And even if you think yourself really funky and you're in an open relationship, there's some ideas about fidelity, and right? I mean, there's always something, right? Whereas with friendship, yes, there is a code maybe of loyalty, or we're not going to betray each other, we're not going to stab each other in the back, but beyond that, who knows what's going to happen? In fact, the best way to ruin it is to say, this is what's going to happen, these are the kind of friends we're going to be, because you've killed it, right? So friendship is promiscuous by its nature. It thrives on openness and experimentation. And that's just, you know, I always thought if you had stopped and asked me, I would have said, yeah, I'm into friendships. but writing the book made me realize how amazing they are. That's also what I mean by praise, in a sense, that when you focus on something and you really study it in some sense. Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Nessa, you go
No,
first.
please go ahead.
Oh, okay. My question was, when you're traveling, do you find yourself more stimulated to write something new based on the inspiration of the new place, you know, aside from New York, etc., or London, or do you feel that you write better when you're back home, reflecting on where your travels took you?
No, I'm very happy not moving at all. I like travel. I mean, I enjoy travel and many good reasons to do it, and I'm obliged to because of my life and where people I love live. And but it's not. No, I do very well being in one place.
Okay. And your question was?
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And this is a little bit of an extension of the question about male friendships. But first of all, I just want to say I cried a lot when I was reading your novel. Maybe, which isn't saying much because I do cry a lot generally. But thank you so much for writing this book. It meant a lot. You made the comment in the interview about the friends in this book, you know, not being your friends, and that this was a novel. But at the same time, you also spoke about how certain parts of the book are very personal to you and almost hard to talk about in public, and you know you don't want to read them out loud. And I'm sorry that this is a personal question, but how much of your friendships influence this book, and did you actively try to keep your personal life out of it, or did you let it influence the book? And if one of your friends were to read the book, you know, would they relate to parts of it?
My closest male friends are very cross that they're not in the book. I feel like yeah. But look, I mean, this business is both very simple and also incredibly mysterious. You know, in the sense that you cannot write anything without it being personal. Like, it's all autobiography and it's all fiction. Even the autobiography is fiction. It's both at the same time. In the sense that none of the features of this book, none of the things that happen, the people are real, or I've heard it, or this is a story based on, none of it. But it's all very, very personal, because I'm mining things that mean something to me. These questions of what time does to you when you leave home, and how it complicates what return is, and whether you could, what it means is that whether you could ever return, whether return is ever a possibility. These are things that I've lived with. I'm not Hisham. What Hisham says there to his mother is not what it's not my relationship to my mother at all. But in some way, it's something I know, and it's the obligation to explain myself, even to myself, not to anyone else, is present in my mind, and I use it. I use it. See, the thing is, inside of you, and this, I don't mean this to sound schizophrenic, but inside of you, you have a writer, and the writer is ruthless. The writer is just going for whatever it is that he can find, that he needs to do the thing. And then you have the person who's thinking, how did I end up here? I'd rather be somewhere else. I want to go have a nice lunch with a friend. That's what I want to do. So you're just using material, or using, not material, no, material is the wrong word. You're using states of being, or feelings, or what I would call your sentimental education, right? Or what Flaubert would call your sentimental education, in that sense. Thank you all for being so kind and present. These things, when you do several of them, you learn something about the quality of the presence, and this is very, very precious to me, and it means a lot. So thank you for coming, and thank you to Sarah for emceeing.
Oh, Faye, it's an honor. Can I read something just again from this book, just as like a goodbye and a good night to go out, which I think is so beautiful, and I think it resonated a little bit with the last question. This is on page 361. It's in an email from Hisham, and he's quoting what his mother says to him about love. And Hisham has been living in, am I saying his name properly? In exile for how many years? 20.
He's at 15, for almost 30 years.
He's been living in exile for 30 years, and he goes home, and he hasn't, in that time, he has had a relationship with Claire. For those who've read it, he's obviously had a very deep friendship with the narrator, but he goes back to his family, who have not been living in exile. They've been living with each other in a state of love and forbearance and irritation and humor and everything else. And this is something that his mother says to him about it's about family love, but I think it applies to friendship and to all love. No man should seek to see his family objectively, she said, not only because of the sheer impossibility of the task, but because such an ambition alone breaks the covenant between kin. The whole point is to love unfathomably, where hate and affection, bewilderment and clarity are braided so tightly that they form an unbreakable cord, a rope fit to lift a nation. That's what your forebears did. And you, it's not your games with the truth, your disregard for God and tradition, but this above all else, lights the fire in my veins. You sit as a stranger would, as a member of the audience observing, affording yourself the space created by that objectivity of yours, which is nothing but a cold and empty schoolyard at night, a sad and abandoned place, in order to watch from a distance. Watch then, as we lift our loads, as if you were the master and we the slaves. For the point about this life, my boy, is not to be good or wise, but to be human, not to show the rest of us up. On that amazing note, thank you so much for coming.
So much. That was fantastic. We're going to be doing a book signing here in the corner, and if you'd like to just make a line along the back wall, after that you can join us for a drink downstairs at the wine bar. Thank you.